This is the story of me, Decimus Fabius, who was sent as an ambassador to Franks Anno Domini 363. I will honestly tell, without any bias, about my encounters and what happened during my stay with the Franks. I had to leave Rome with heavy heart, but I will do whatever is required in the service of the empire. And I was able to get myself to the retinue of Claudio, the Franks faction leader, with whom I will travel as he moves in these dark woods of the northern Europe. Claudio was a builder. He always had to have something going on in his settlements. And at the same time, he gathered some very heavy taxes to be able to fund his ambitious construction projects. One reason I went among the Franks was that we want to secure good relations with them. So we try to make sure that no hostilities begin with the beloved Roman Empire, or some call it the Western Roman Empire, and these, well, perhaps you should not call them barbarians, but with these people in the north here, even though they are pagans. I don't think we want to make peasants, but let's make some real. Oh. So, Claudio left his second in command, Merovius, to his capital, Ficus Franki, and the directions he gave was to produce soldiers, not peasants. He was about to assault Alemanni, and he needed the troops to accomplish that. Because of my excellent efforts, the Romans are favoring a trade agreement, and additionally they are hopefully willing to pay for it. And I also proposed an alliance, which also received a good welcome from the Franks, and of course the Romans were very enthusiastic about it, so they were even willing to pay something for that alliance. So, at least a part of my job is done here, and I hope the good relations with these two nations, or between a kingdom and an empire, will remain. However, the Franks didn't want to have diplomatic relations with all. They wanted to expand, and Vicus Alemanni was clearly their target. So Claudio gathered his armies and began a siege. To bolster his troops, he also hired some mercenaries, even though his expenditure were already higher than his income at the moment. And he also ordered Merovius to increase troop production, so that Vicus Alemanni could be taken as easily as possible and as fast as possible. We also have heard some worrisome news from the east. There is some large barbarian horde on the move. And the heathens here are praying for their god that the Huns, as they are called, will never set foot in this area here. But some of my Christian friends know that they are a scourge of God sent to harass the pagans of Northern Europe. And, for example, the Franks will get what they deserve because of their pagan ways. At the Battle of Vicus Alemanni, I had an excellent opportunity to watch Claudio at work, how he will command his troops, what kind of tactics and strategies he will use, and so forth. For the opposition wasn't light indeed, and as it was raining very heavily, our armies marched towards the walls of Vicus Alemanni, ready to hurl themselves against the unyielding enemies. Perhaps the weather was an omen of the battle result to come. I don't know how these pagans consult the fates or omens, but clearly this heavy downpour has to mean something. The battering rams were able to reach the walls, while the enemy desperately scrambled to protect the weak spot on the walls and the weakening gates. And the Frankish archers already opened fire and drew the first blood in the battle.
Your warriors have broken the gate. The way is open. Let your men kill all the cowards inside.
These Frankish barbarians clearly can make some siege equipment. perhaps not as good as we Romans, but they are not to be underestimated. However, Claudio wasn't satisfied with breached gates and one breach on the walls. He wanted to have a second breach as well. While the archers and Levi spearmen skirmished with the enemy. Spear warband. The Alemanni had two warlords inside Vicus Alemanni, which made the battle quite difficult for the Franks. Claudio moved his retinue close to the wall to encourage his troops. As the archers continued to pepper down the enemy warbands, and the ground was already beginning to be littered by enemy corpses. And the enemies clearly could not sustain the rate of casualties they were taking, and the first unit soon broke and fled towards their city center. As the enemy warband was engaged with our Levi spearmen, Claudio commanded his Axhirban mercenaries, or Axhirban, to hit the enemy warband to the back, and no wonder that those units broke. They were clearly poorly led. Enemy's tactics were really horrible, which is good to know if we Romans sometime have to face the Alemanni. They are not tacticians. They waste their troops, they attack alone, perhaps seeking personal glory instead of trying to achieve victory. Also, it seems that these Alemanni barbarians don't know how to use their bows. The bowmen are just running towards the melee troops and are getting slaughtered in the process. The balance of power had clearly shifted in favor of the Franks, and as it were, they were determined to advance further in to the enemy stronghold. The only real threat to the Franks were the two enemy warlords with their retinues, all of them brave and battle-hardened men, determined to keep the invader out of their land. But always, mere heroism won't be enough. Usually, tactics, good general, and perhaps sometimes some luck as well is needed. Eager to participate to the battle in the front lines, Claudio led his bodyguard to the battle against the Lombard archers. However, his men were determined to keep their commanders safe, so he had some difficulties to push through his own men that were protective of him. However, his arrival, mere sight of him, was enough to break the last of the enemy archers. Claudio sent his cavalry to flank the enemy general, while his archers exchanged fire with the enemy archers. However, you should never rely on mercenaries. Their morale is weak and they break easily. You should remember that, my countrymen. If there is some time when you need mercenaries or services of mercenaries, they are not to be trusted. However, the cavalry flanking maneuver of the Frank general caught the Alemanni warlord by surprise, and he was slain while fighting, or while his bodyguard was fighting in many fronts. And now there was only one warlord left, and he had clearly a weaker bodyguard. So his chances of survival were very limited. He was the last bastion of the Alemanni hope, because if he would fall, then there were some scattered defenders trying to protect the city square, but it seems, or it was revealed, that he was coward by nature. He left his men to die, while he himself fled to the last of his men. And so the Alemanni were conquered. The Franks are proving themselves to be a bloodthirsty lot. They exterminated the population of Vicus Alemanni. Claudio says that it was because they want to keep the population in check. I have my doubts about that. However, he gathered his troops, trained some more. They had some time to feast after the successful conquest, but Claudio's hunger for conquest was not sated yet. He was seeking new areas to conquer. And despite he was almost swimming in money, he did not lower taxes. He just wanted more. In that he reminds some of our most cheapskate or greedy emperors for whom nothing was enough. So that caused some worry in me, because such men should not be trusted too much. He also began a decisive military build-up in Vicus Alemanni, and he left Tancred as the commander of the city, even though all men told that Tancred was unstable, he was not fit to lead, but he was left there nonetheless. In Ficus Franki, the populace was not liking the taxes at all, and the city was growing, so Claudio ordered Merovius to begin the construction of the Great Hall. And the Frankish spies had found their next target, Campus Chatti, or perhaps it should be pronounced as Campus Catti. And he sent a diplomat to have contact with the Eastern Roman Empire. He had an intention to forge an alliance with them as well. However, the devious Saxons were already besieging Campus Catti, and angered by that, Claudio decided that he might want to take care of those Saxons before moving against Campus Catti. So he sent his spy to Vicus Saxones, which was rather lightly defended, and thus made itself a good target for Claudio and his men. He took some reinforcements from Vicus Franki, and the army headed northwards. I'm saddened by the fact that I get at the moment no news from my beloved city or from my relatives or how the empire is doing. I'm a bit worried about those rumors from the east. I'm praying constantly that God will protect Rome and all her areas against any pagan invasions. Claudio ordered construction projects to be started in Vicus Alemanni as well. He intended to show the population that he will take good care of them, better care than their original leaders. There were some Saxon armies trying to block the route to Vicus Saxones as we marched northwards, and Claudio wasn't happy for this army. He hired some more mercenaries, intent on bolstering the ranks. Perhaps he already then had further conquests in mind. However, he wasn't all violence and fire. He had trade agreements made, for example, with Lombardy. But overall, I think I tend to agree what our historians are telling about him. He was rather bloodthirsty king who cared not about his neighbors but only for his personal glory and conquest, which is of course to a degree admirable quality, especially in an ally of Rome. However, I was not privy of his plans, what he was about to do after the siege of Vicus Saxones. He didn't even declare a formal war, he just marched against the city and began the siege. All the while his armies grew in Vicus Franki and Vicus Alemanni. He also began wall constructions in Vicus Franki, perhaps anticipating that his neighbors would soon grow suspicious of his aggressiveness. However, while we were in the northern front, we received sad news as the faction heir was assassinated. We don't know who did the assassination itself, but we know that they were up to no good. Angered by that, Claudio promised that he will show no mercy for the enemies he will conquer. Soon he will burn their cities and take all the possible loot he can find. And as Vicus Saxones was so lightly defended, our spies had told us so, Claudio ordered his men to attack. The city had stone walls surrounding it, nothing compared to the magnificent walls of Rome, but stone walls nonetheless, and the siege of Vicus Saxones wasn't as easy as that of Vicus Alemanni. And once again, it was raining while the siege was about to begin. But this time, the casualties would be high in the battle. the enemies were determined, or the Saxons were determined to defend their walls. They had manned them. And now it would be up to God to decide who will win the battle on the walls. The Franks had copied Roman siege tower technology and were firing from the top of the tower at the defenders on the wall, which were pulling back from the onslaught. The enemies managed to burn down the battering ram, which forced some of the troops to withdraw. But all the time the ladders and the siege tower were nearing the wall. However, the enemy bowmen from the towers were able to cause heavy casualties on the forces that were moving against the walls. But the Franks were brave. You have to give them that. They didn't falter under that rain of arrows, but steadfastly managed to bring the ladders and the siege tower to the wall and began to take the fight to the enemies. However, there is only so much that a single detachment of Levi spearmen, even experienced ones, can do against enemies on the wall. And initially the battle didn't go too well for the invaders. However, the Saxons were overconfident and focused too much on attacking the enemies that were climbing on the ladders, so that they didn't notice that there were other ladders on the wall as well, and thus the Franks were able to gain foothold and continued to advance, and the balance of power on the walls was shifting to the invaders' favor.
Our warriors have taken the walls. Now the streets will run with blood.
Enemy towers were already falling to the Franks. Only the gateway remained under Saxon control, and the situation was growing perilous for the Saxons on the wall. As more and more troops poured against them. They noticed that new troops were coming to them from behind, and there was almost an endless river of troops on the wall ahead of them. So they knew their doom was upon them. And as if the situation didn't look perilous enough, news of about gateway lost reached them that the enemies were on their backs, hitting them at any moment, and they were beginning to shake, and then they were beginning to waver as the rest of the Frankish army began its dash forwards, and they broke. They tried desperately to get from the wall, but there was no escape. They were surrounded. They just had to die. As it is said by some great thinkers, it is brave man's part with valor die, or with valor live and with valor die. And that was exactly what those Levi spearmen were about to do. They were fighting to their deaths. And at the same time, Claudio began organizing his troops so that he could hit the Saxon cavalry that was still defending the city center. Claudio left the spear war band, or Levi spearmen that had taken the hardest hit in the battle, as reserve, and ordered rest of his troops forwards to make a wall against enemy cavalry. At the same time, he ordered his archers behind that infantry. However, the archers had some difficulties finding their proper places. But perhaps this is worth noting for any Roman general if we sometime have to face the Franks in battle, how they will organize their troops. So they are clearly keeping their archers behind their infantry. So they are not favoring any quick skirmishers against the enemies, but are advancing rather patiently. They also utilize the shield wall formation, a tight pack of units, which Auxilia Palatina also uses. And when they are ready, the archers open fire to draw the enemies into a foolhardy attacks against the shield wall. And the Saxon light cavalry absolutely stood no chance against the shield walls. However, then the Saxon king decided to join the battle. His elite bodyguard surged forward to engage the spearmen, and at least for the moment it seemed that they will halt the onslaught. However, the spearmen held steady and began stabbing at the enemy horses while the archers continued firing at them. And then Claudio himself joined the fight, and his bodyguard was able to slay the Saxon king, which was clearly a blow to the Saxon morale. Their light cavalry was already panicking, and the Levi spearmen surged forwards, and the mercenaries were joining the fight as well, and the famous Saxon bodyguard was wavering as well. It knew it could not hold against the onslaught of the enemies, and it broke, and all of the surviving Saxon soldiers fled Vicus Saxones. And thus Claudio was able to secure his second victory, and what appalls me is the amount of violence with which he fulfilled his promise, and he exterminated the populace of Vicus Saxones, even though he wasn't sure that his heir was murdered or assassinated by the Saxons. Once again, his men had some small time to rest before they were ordered to march once again. The construction projects continued, and let's hope there will be at least some semblance of peace for now for the Franks. It seems their friends, the Lombardi, were able to take Campus Cati as the Franks were concentrated on Vicus Saxones. It remains to be seen whether Claudio will take that as a personal insult and move against his trade partners as well. I hope that these letters reach you, my friend, safely or in good way in Rome, and I hope you remain safe there. And I pray to God that we will meet someday soon. I will report once again when something new happens. Your Decimus Fabius,